Good morning, afternoon, and evening to everyone signing in from across the world. Thank you so much for joining the Commonwealth Chamber of Commerce Hong Kong today for a very important topic that is related to urban design. And as you all can agree, we can hardly imagine a world without the massive infrastructures of towns, cities, roads, and buildings that we inhabit today. And as such, it does not come as a surprise that the urban design and planning services industry is valued at US $145 billion as of 2022 and is expected to rise to 215 billion US dollars by 2030. This does not come as a surprise considering the increase in population and rapid urbanization. But with this rapid urbanization and industrial development comes a plethora of dangerous challenges, including climate change, rising pollution, increasing natural hazards, and dwindling resources. And as such, this is why this topic is so important, because not only are we talking about urban design as a whole, but we're talking about it in a sustainable and ecological context. And that being said, I'm very, very glad to be joined by two exceptional experts to talk about how we can harness technological innovations so that not only can we continue to keep our relationship, our very unique relationship with nature, but also enjoy the benefits of modern infrastructure. So first off, my name is Matina Hamad, the research committee here in the Commonwealth Chamber of Commerce Hong Kong, and I'm very delighted to introduce our speakers. First up, we have Dr. Samuel Chen, who is the Associate Professor of Practice in the Department of Urban Heritage and Sustainability at the University of Hong Kong. He is an expert in many fields of research, especially in the origins and evolution of Middle Eastern and Western Asian societies and the construction of time and history in early urban societies. He has over 20 years of experience in managing international projects, many of which relate to sustainable and urban development. We are also joined by Judith Sykes. She is a senior director of both the award-winning engineering consultancy, Expedition Engineering, and the sustainability consultancy, Useful Projects Limited, both of which are driving positive changes for the clients and societies. Judith Sykes has over 20 years of experience in urban development and infrastructure delivery. She has been working on urban development strategies and infrastructure management planning for government associations, major developers, and asset holders throughout the Commonwealth. So with that, I would like to pass the floor on to our Chamber's Secretary General, Mr. Andrew Wells, to kick off the webinar. Mr. Wells, over to you.
Thank you so much, Martina. Our research committee manager here at the Commonwealth Chamber of Commerce in Hong Kong. I'm grateful for her introduction to our chamber, which was established only a year and a half ago, and to this very important event, Urban Design, Hong Kong and the Commonwealth. My name is Andrew Wells, and I am Secretary General of the CCC Hong Kong. Before beginning the webinar, I need to make two quick apologies. Just a few minutes ago, I received a message from my friend, Dr. Tim Foreman, founding partner of Undivided Ventures, and one of our most distinguished speakers, that as a result of sad and unexpected family circumstances, he will be unable to join us this evening. Second, our chairman, Julia Charlton, is currently on a flight returning to Hong Kong from Singapore from an important Commonwealth conference, and will also, as a consequence, be unable to attend. Despite this, I believe we're going to have an unusually stimulating and important discussion on a topic that is often ventured, discussed and debated in Hong Kong and beyond, but less often with the focus on key practical detail. To elaborate following on Martina's excellent introduction, urban development and design, two different things, whether in a Commonwealth or a worldwide context, are the topics of endless editorials, as we all know, and internet commentary. That's a natural result of the exponential growth of urbanization and its unintended consequences, both good and evil. To reach any useful conclusions, in my own opinion, it's crucial to look to specific and practical aspects of the problems and their specific and practical solutions. So with that in mind, Our first distinguished speaker today is another good friend, Dr. Samuel Chen. As Martina has already introduced him fairly fully, I'll just mention that he is Associate Professor of Practice at the University of Hong Kong, and he has had many years of experience in managing projects all over the world with a focus on infrastructure generally and transport in particular. But in addition to this contemporary perspective, Dr. Chen has an unrivaled knowledge of the origins and evolution of urban design, from the beginnings of the world's civilization in the ancient Middle East, in India, in China, in Europe, in Mesoamerica. And this continuity between old and new allows him to provide insights which may not be immediately apparent to experts with narrower timeframes. Today, Professor Chen's focus will be on Hong Kong, appropriately covering its urban development and challenges from earliest times through the present and into the future. Our second distinguished speaker is Dr. Judith Sykes, who is well known on the public speaking circuit in the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth on development and infrastructure strategy, as these are implemented or are tried to be implemented by not only governments, but developers and investors. Of course, I believe she'll discuss with us well-known topics: sustainable development, urban regeneration, the importance of resilient communities, but from an engineering perspective, rather than a traditional planning or even architectural one. It is, after all, the fortune of engineers to put into practice the concepts and ideas of our planners and strategists. And I, for one, am delighted to welcome her here this evening. Without other preliminaries, I would like to ask Professor Chen to start the substantive part of this discussion and take the virtual floor. Professor.
Yeah, thank you so much, actually, Mr. Wells, and also Ms. Hamad. Actually, thank you for this warm invitation to participate in this important event hosted by the Commonwealth Chamber of Commerce. As both actually Ms. Hamad and also Mr. Well actually commented, actually my background is really urban history, actually, so an academic background, although my professional background has to do with managing actually projects is primarily in urban studies. So today I'm going to give a talk on this subject of Hong Kong's urban history, primarily from the planning perspective. Although I have worked on the planning history actually on primarily West Asia, and also because the course I teach actually at Hong Kong University, I cover other parts of the world. Hong Kong, certainly, although I have lived and worked in Hong Kong, this is something I recently picked up. Actually, certainly there's a lot I have to learn from all of you, for those of you who have participated and also conduct research on this subject for many years. I think there's much to learn, for me to learn from you. So basically, this talk is a summary of Professor Pui Yin Ho's book published in 2018, actually Making Hong Kong, a history of its urban development, and in which she charted actually the 6 stages of Hong Kong's urban development. And the first stage actually is the beginning of the colonial development when the colonial government actually took over in 1841 and to 1898. And second phase is a territorial expansion of Hong Kong, adding to its territory actually primarily the new territories from a lease, 99 years lease actually from the Qing dynasty government. And the third phase is the Sino-Japanese War era, actually 1941 to 1945, which is a very important as well, actually in many respects in terms of infrastructure as well as economy, which is quite different from the colonial government's approach. And the fourth phase is a post-war urban development. When the colonial government actually took over actually from the Japanese occupation, and from 1945 to 1979, there's the fifth phase of the urban development of Hong Kong, which is prior to the handover of Hong Kong to China, and from 1979 to 1977. And the next phase actually is the urban transformation after the return of Hong Kong to China. And actually it's divided actually into two aspects. One is really focusing on the transformation, and the other side actually primarily actually in terms of citizenship actually participation. The other side actually focuses more on sustainable development and integration of Hong Kong with mainland China from 1997 to 2015, and even beyond that point, because I will discuss about actually the latest actually development, urban development is a continuation of that era, of that phase. One of the important actually developments is the Northern Metropolis, actually, which is very much representative of that the policies and strategies developed during that phase. So let's take a look at the phase one, beginning of the colonial development, 1841 to 1898. So it's the city of Victoria, built on the military stronghold on the northern shore of Hong Kong Island, with the scale of entrepot. And so it's primarily to develop actually trade. So it's not necessarily actually long-term actually development as a city, actually primarily just to facilitate actually the trading actually footing in Asia. And so the colonial government actually started with developing, designing actually administrative departments and commercial and cultural institutions following the Western urban development practices, primarily designed by the British engineer Alexander Gordon, appointed by Governor Henry Pottinger, who was the third governor of Hong Kong. And so these are institutions and departments, including actually police stations and built around the governor's house to form the government hill as the political hub. And then was also the harbor master's office and post office located at the harbor front to provide assistance to commerce, upper and lower bazaars for daily purchases, and as well as education institutions set up actually on Morrison Hill in Wan Chai, and gardens providing recreational space. So you can see actually these are actually quite basically follow the Western practice in terms of urban development. And you can also see the way they utilize the land for these government buildings. And so the Hong Kong actually has challenges from nature and reliance on and the colonial government had to rely on advanced construction techniques for large-scale infrastructure facilities to mitigate actually these shortage, this area of shortage, primarily actually land shortage, and especially on a very hilly actually topography. Land reclamation from sea on the northern shore actually for setting up a commercial district was a very important development, and historical constructions all around the island, including roads, piers, reservoirs, typhoon shelters, and other public facilities were also added later. And different urban development strategies were also observed actually according to different districts. Actually, in the central actually district, was really developed based upon actually Western urban development practices, with commercial activities being carried out in a systematic manner. The enactment of a strict enforcement of law is key to the implementation of policies. And so, but on the other hand, you have Shuangwang actually in the western part of the city, which is where the Chinese community actually was located, with the poor housing and hygiene conditions and high crime rates, and with no proper town planning before the outbreak of a bubonic plagues in 1894, which was already forewarned by British engineer Professor Osbert Chadwick, who was James Chadwick's son, actually, who was a social reformer actually in Britain, and during the Industrial Revolution era. So this is so there is a disparity actually between different approaches to urban planning and urban governance. As I said, actually, the British engineer Professor Osbert Chadwick already in his inspections in the early 1880s actually reported on Hong Kong's sanitary conditions and sewage system. He already forewarned actually these may trigger actually outbreak of epidemic diseases, and sure enough, about I think it's less than 10 years or so did happen in 1894, and I think it's a colonial government actually was. Although it was warm, but they somehow think the segregation of the two areas of the residents could prevent actually any kind of contamination. Actually, if there's a kind of epidemic actually disease actually happened in the Chinese community, but that was not the case. Actually, that the areas actually where Westerners actually stay was affected. And the point about the beginning of the colonial development is the external political and economic environment also influence the priority and speed of development of different districts. Central, for example, received a lot of Western actually investment in 1840s and the 1860s. Whereas actually Shuangwang, Yamate actually received Chinese investment after the 1870s. So you can see actually there's, in terms of the funding as well, in comparison with the later development where the colonial government or even after Hong Kong was returned to China, and there's more kind of a concerted actually government initiative actually to direct funding for urban development. Although there was in some places, in some projects, certainly actually they're more private, but that was also organized by the government. And the second phase actually is the territorial expansion. The signing after the signing of the convention for the extension of the Hong Kong territory in 1898, the lease of the north boundary street, Kowloon, and south of the Shenzhen River for 99 years. Actually, this is a new territory, and which serves as a hinterland actually for the urban area, primarily the core districts, including actually the Victoria Harbour, actually the city of Victoria, as well as the Kowloon Peninsula. And basically, these actually hinterlands were used for agriculture and fishery and to supply the necessities of the urban area. And development of the land south of the Kowloon Mountains range and also north of the boundary street actually were also being carried out by the colonial government. covering the areas of districts such as Shanshuipo, actually Konglongtong, and Wang Tai-sing, Kowloon City, and these basically became the actually new Kowloon area, providing much space actually for urban development, including housing, industrial land, and other facilities such as the airport, railway station, piers, and open spaces. Apart from the entrepot actually trade, Hong Kong attracted abundant capital and talent that left mainland China due to wars. So there's a lot of this basically became the heaven actually for a lot of refugees actually from China, and then it was no longer a temporary actually pull for Britain to trade in Asia, but also became an important commercial city for Britain in the Asia Pacific region. Population growth actually also led to the need of a more systematic, actually long-term urban planning to manage and utilize land, departing from the previous actually short-term strategies that merely responded actually to the needs of the situation. So we have in 1922, we have the Town Planning Committee established to formulate urban planning schemes for the following 50 years. And 1939, actually, Town Planning Ordinance was set up to develop Hong Kong as Britain's bridgehead in the Asia Pacific region. And various proposals made by during this period, also various proposals were made actually by 3 governors during that time, since the late 1920s, for attempting to hold on to Hong Kong after the expiration of the lease in 1997. This also shows that there is genuine attempt for long-term planning just after the lease ended. Also there was, in terms of change, actually, there's also Chinese representatives participating in long-term planning as well in the government. Apparently, the colonial government realized that from the bubonic actually plague incident, actually, there is important to engage the Chinese community, and both in terms of governance as well as planning. And let's move on to the next phase of Hong Kong's development. This is a phase of a Sino-Japanese War era, 1941 to 1945. Japanese occupation, 3 years and 8 months. Basically, Japanese occupation, they rejected the pre-war urban development by the British colonial government, focusing on commerce and trade. Instead, they tend to focus on developing Hong Kong as a transport hub in the Pacific region and the resource supply station for its greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere. And different approaches. They also have different approaches to solving the challenges posed by nature. For example, they began to aggressively pursue and promoted actually agriculture and forestry, and following their model actually of developing in Taiwan and inviting actually experts from Taiwan to help Hong Kong develop its agriculture and forestry, planting acacia and silk trees in all the districts of Hong Kong Island, Kowloon, and the New Territories. And demographic and expenditure control was also evident, primarily because they tried to control the population so that they will not, in terms of number of people actually in Hong Kong, so that will not utilize too many resources. So this is primarily done expulsion, even actually massacre. And they also try to achieve a different aim rather than economic development through commerce and trade, which were banned actually by the Japanese government. They tend to focus on that unification of the greater East Asia region with the military means. There was also large-scale infrastructure development being carried out. Actually, expansion of one of the obvious example is the expansion of Kai Tak Airport, actually in Kowloon, and through forcible displacement of the local residents. And all of these, some of these policies actually had quite a bit of bearing actually in the post-war era in terms of expansion of the airport, which was followed by the colonial government, and as was the development of agriculture and forestry that was also picked up by the colonial government as well. And let's move on to phase 4, post-war urban development, 1945 to 1979. So during this phase, actually, there are many challenges that hinder long-term urban planning, including actually insufficient land resources, shortage of economic resources, numerous tasks involving reconstruction after war, and unstable global political situation. And at the same time, there was a fast population growth, particularly from the influx of the war refugees in the face of a dire shortage of land and economic resources. Basically push the colonial government actually to come up with ideas, actually, the solutions to accommodate actually these people. British town planning experts were hired from Britain in 1946 to carry out studies and formulate long-term development blueprints. Patrick Abercrombie from the University of London was appointed by Governor Mark Young as the consultant who provided a 23-page actually long-term planning report in 1948. And in this report, he basically outlined the 3 areas that could be, the colonial government should act on in order to address the challenges. One area is to improve the city's internal and external transport, including port facilities, road networks, tunnels, and railways. And following actually his proposal, and which already started being developed by David Owen in his Victoria Harbour Transport Plan in 1941. And we have the expansion of Kai Tak Airport, the Cross Harbour Tunnel, and starting in 1969, and also the development of MTR, started actually in 1972. The second area he pointed out, actually, to mitigate actually the challenges, is to develop the suburbs and expand the space available for development in the city, as well as to solve the problem of housing issue, public space distribution, and ancillary facilities brought on by the population increase, so as to achieve a reasonable population density. And the colonial government began the dispersion of the urban population among satellite cities and newly established new towns in the new territory, including Chu Wang, Sating, and these are actually early actually new towns in the new territories. And also plus on top of that, actually they have high density residential housing in Kwotong, in Kowloon. And the third area he pointed out actually for tackling the challenges is to improve urban planning legislation and mechanism, design the distribution of governmental, commercial, industrial, and residential land uses, and rationally face the city's inherent deficiencies. And this actually triggered actually the establishment of, well, basically coincided with actually the establishment of a town planning office in 1947. Basically, they began to utilize, to adopt a macro perspective suitable for long-term planning, planning political, industrial, especially manufacturing, and commercial housing roles of district in urban areas, aimed at coordinating with the development of core districts and facilitating the realization of each district's potential according to its geographical conditions for the overall development of the city. The development of the City Hall, the Star Ferry Pier, and Edinburgh Place for the rebranding of Central as a political, economic, and cultural center are good examples of these different districts can focus on in terms of their functions. Let's move on to phase 5 prior to the handover. The reform of opening. So there are different, Hong Kong actually in terms of development was affected by events and political events actually in mainland China. So this already could be seen from the Qing dynasty already, actually some the internal turmoil of the Qing dynasty, as well as the civil war actually between the communists, actually the nationalists. Then 1978, this is after the Chinese communists actually took over. Basically, there's an economic reform and opening up policy that had a tremendous impact on Hong Kong's economic actually restructuring, transforming the post-war focus on the development of manufacturing industry to the enhancing of the entrepreneurial trade and financial services. And there is also planning and construction of a new airport to improve port facilities and promote cities' economic development through foreign trade. But somehow this was because of the Hong Kong uncertainties of Hong Kong's future, and this was postponed. And the political and economic crisis in 1989 reopened this case in terms of the port and airport development strategy, and also known as the Rose Garden Project, and was rolled out actually as basically as a series of large-scale infrastructure works to regain the confidence of the people of Hong Kong, as well as the world's confidence in Hong Kong, with a proposed project of 98.6 billion Hong Kong dollars, of which 54 billion Hong Kong dollars would come from the government. And this sizable transportation network allowed the city to expand in scale, extending the city's reach from its two cores, both actually in terms of the Hong Kong side, Hong Kong Island side, as well as the Kowloon Peninsula, as well as the new territories. And the issue of land use actually in the new territory as one of the most challenging issues for the expansion of the city and in long-term planning. And this will carry on in later periods as well, due to the dispute in terms of governments trying to take over the land actually with from the locals. So that's with a lot of legal disputes. With the China and Britain's talk on the return of Hong Kong's sovereignty to China in 1997, so the long-term planning of the colonial government was also affected in terms of, because Hong Kong is going to return to China. Phase 6 actually is the urban transformation after the return of China. And this, in terms of direction of urban planning and development, since 1997, so this has been constantly adjusted and adapted to the aspiration of the society and the changing social values. And the usual practice of increasing urban land areas by means of reclamation, especially when it was related to both sides of the Victorian Harbour, was challenged. And is, for example, the demolition of the Star Ferry Pier and Queen's Pier caused controversy. Members of the public have attached unprecedented importance to the conservation of historical buildings, the preservation of collective memories, and the inheritance of cultural values. I think this is especially important. And after the return of China, people feel there is a more sense of a need actually to hold on to their cultural identity. And the preservation and revitalization of historical buildings were strengthened in urban renewal projects at the request of the community, such as the Central Police Station, the West Wing of the Central Government Office, and some of the complete actually demolition of old buildings and the construction of new modern skyscrapers were viewed as threats actually to cultural identity and heritage. And there were also new standards actually for assessing urban design and planning in terms of in terms of conservation and revitalization of historical buildings, and also the assessment of air quality, noise, visual impact on both sides of the Victoria Harbour, building heights and public space, and even actually the government trying to come up with the incentive actually to encourage actually land developers actually to build to public space, develop public space, so that they don't have to pay premium of the land. So there's also focusing not only actually solely on the economic benefits in terms of the urban development, as was in early post-war days, but also the living quality of each member of society, the interests of a region, and even mankind as a whole. And there's also a rising kind of awareness of a public participation during this period, which already began to emerge during the post-war era. And this was certainly the period when such awareness was heightened. And because of this heightened awareness of public participation, this made actually the whole town planning and development process more arduous. We can see it actually from multiple revision of the town planning ordinance which was introduced in 1939. The final actually this part of this development actually has to do with the sustainability, actually in response to the UN promotion of sustainability since 1972. So Hong Kong came up with a series of response actually in terms of its commitment to sustainable urban development. And also there's another area of which is also very important actually, which is integration with mainland China. So there are actually three areas in terms of urban development that are very important during this time. After the return of Hong Kong to China, one is the population actually. In terms of population, in terms of its movement, actually in terms of between Hong Kong and mainland China, this is very important in terms of providing services to Hong Kong residents, even within China, and vice versa. There are some issues that needs to be addressed in terms of integration. And also there is also the economic restructuring, which Hong Kong actually needs to begin to focus on more technological innovation in order to stay ahead. And third area, which is also important, which is the integration with mainland China. We can see all of these areas actually represented actually in the development of the Northern Metropolis planning strategy. The Northern Metropolis basically is a designated area of the 300 square kilometers of land, coupled with the 400 square kilometers land, and on the Shenzhen side for both cities to work together. But Hong Kong actually is trying to use this this piece of land actually to work closer to Shenzhen in order to develop its high-tech industry, which will complement its traditional strength in terms of finance, as a financial center, especially in the coal economic area and metropolitan area. So we basically have two economic centers. One is in the south, one is in the north. So that will help Hong Kong actually to achieve its economic restructuring and industrial transformation. But at the same time, it helps Hong Kong spatially to work with, to be integrated with mainland China by utilizing actually mainland China, especially GBA, the Greater Bay Area, actually as the kind of ready market in terms of supply chain, but also to work with GBA in terms of attracting talents, especially actually given Hong Kong has lost quite a bit actually talents, and so he's trying to utilize this corridor to invite talents from mainland China. So, and also this is representative of the modern planning process, planning, nature of planning as well. It's a highly integrated piece of planning document. So in terms of, both in terms of trying to achieve actually economic transformation, restructuring, as well as the social things which allow people who work, traditionally this is already people who try to develop actually the new territories actually in terms of housing and workplace were integrated. So they didn't have to travel all the way to the south actually to work. So that was already started actually earlier, but this is given even a stronger impetus because of the awareness of the environmental protection and climate change, and the reduction, the need for reduction of the emission. So
thank you, Professor. I'm
okay.
Sorry to interrupt again. We really do need to move on to the next speaker, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you. Judith, if I may ask you to take the floor.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for inviting me as well to present today. So as has been introduced, I lead the sustainability and infrastructure team here at Expedition, and my interest is in the interface between engineering infrastructure and placemaking principles. And I've had a long interest in that sort of relationship between engineering and the people we're creating those sort of systems for. Expedition is part of this wider organisation called the Useful Simple Trust. We are a B Corp, and that's a corporate model which prioritises people and planet. We predominantly work in the UK, but we have an international reputation in sustainable development, built largely off the back of our work on the London 2012 Olympics. And so we've been invited to participate in projects from South America to Asia, the Middle East, and Europe. So we have quite a few projects in the international environment as well. As a practice, we're really inspired by Kate Raworth's Donut Economics. She's an Oxford economist, and she put forward this model which says that we should be striving for an economy which provides a minimum social foundation within this ecological ceiling. But when she mapped how we're doing against those principles, this is how we fare. So you can see on the right-hand side how we're in overshoot on our planetary boundaries and in shortfall against that sort of social foundation. And so what we've been using is this sort of framework to work with our clients to talk about how these principles could be applied in an urban development context. And we're part of this network of organisations in the Donut Economics Lab, and particularly leading on its application within the built environment. Most recently, we've applied this to a large regeneration project, Meridian Water. It's in the Lee Valley, so just north of the London Olympic Park. And behind this vision for providing that social foundation within environmental ceiling sits a series of progressive targets and strategies and innovative approaches that will be applied over the course of this sort of long-term development to hopefully create a place which is fit for people, it's inclusive, and it's resilient to future climate shifts. And the reason why this is important, there's this report has recently come out called The Circularity Gap, and it re-emphasizes that issue with overshoot on our planetary boundaries, but it identifies 4 key sectors which are the root causes of that overshoot. So food, manufactured goods, mobility, and the built environment. So you can see urban design is effectively responsible for 50% of that overshoot if you combine those 2 aspects. And it also provides us with strategies for implementing systems change, depending, no matter whether you're in a building, growing, or shifting an economy. So there's lessons in there for all countries within the Commonwealth. And I found this diagram really helpful then in reframing people's ambition to really embrace regenerative principles put forward by donut economics. At the moment, the construction industry, urban design sector is very much still around mitigating the negative impacts of development. And what we want to put forward is a more regenerative approach. And what I mean by that is an approach which uses renewable energy, it replenishes our natural water sources, it puts back biodiversity to deliver biodiversity gain, and it wins materials back from the circular economy, and it's based on renewable technologies. And this has been really helpful in shifting ambition for urban development from merely sustainable, which is sort of, if you like, maintaining the status quo, to actually put back those global overshoots. And historically, things like land value, the profit motive, the cost of resources have got in the way of shifting the way in which we approach urban development. But something is shifting in our market, and I think there's 3 facets of this. And we've seen a particular change since COP26, where whilst governments were still struggling to align what they want to do, the business community has very much refocused its efforts on ESG principles. And this is a report that was published last year by PwC, which just shows you how interest in ESG assets is increasing and is set to continue to increase over the next couple of years, and how when surveyed as part of this research, that investors are reporting higher yields on ESG products and assets. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect is, having had a significant decline in the cost of resources as a result of efficiencies in production, we're seeing a reversal of that, largely as a result of reaching the peak of production of many of our resources, but also as demand for resources increases, with demand from developing economies in particular, we're seeing this sort of tipping point, which then makes investment in circularity in particular and resource conservation much more attractive. And I think even before the pandemic, but as well as part of the pandemic, we are valuing things like green space much more highly. And the Mayor of London has been quite pioneering in some of their research around the value of green space to our economy. They estimate that for every £1 that's invested in our green spaces, that returns a £27 return on investment. And those sort of the value that green space brings from a health perspective and well-being perspective is also recognised by this recent research by the UN. So it's not just in the developed economies, it's a global issue and global value. So we're finding it much easier actually to get some of these systems change through. And I just thought I'd talk to you about a few case studies which touch on how we're approaching regenerative design through resilient and restorative landscapes, through a transition to renewable energy within our built environment, and how we're using circular economy principles to build our environments. So this is Zhonggang, which is in China, and we were working for Beaufil Architects. It's a satellite city to Beijing. and it has some pretty extreme water challenges. We either have too much or too little. So our challenge was how to deal with extreme weather events of not causing too much flooding, whilst also dealing with water scarcity in the summer months, and this interrelationship also with this beautiful wetland in the Bayang Lake you can see in this image on the left. And so our proposal was to work with the landscape architects to incorporate water within the landscape, and also use technology. So we're using a smart AI technology which forecasts the weather so that we can store water when we need it and release water when we don't need it in those extreme events. And the combination of those initiatives enabled us to reduce the water footprint by 75% when compared with other developments of its type. But more than that, it contributes to the ecological value. It creates cooling in the summer months, and will enhance the habitats and biodiversity of development. So this sort of multifunctional design approach is absolutely core to what we do. We're also working with a number of developers to really try and rethink their approach to housing and have more confidence in moving away from a traditional transit-orientated model. This is a development that you might see anywhere in the world, a car-dominated sort of urban edge development, and which is being driven by this huge demand for housing. And so what we did was abstracted the model just to show how bonkers, if you like, this type of development is. This is the green space. This is all private gardens. They're all disconnected. These are the footpaths, so all disconnected. How can you have a safe journey as a pedestrian when they don't link up? And then this is the road space, taking up about 40% of the land area, all that carbon, all that cost going into tarmac that is actually relatively lowly used as well. And so that's how it pans out on the left-hand side. And what we've said is you can achieve the same output, but by rethinking how you design, you can give much more to green space, much more to ecology, much more to people, and create this great landscape which people can live in and delivers biodiversity net gain. We are in the midst of an energy transition too, and particularly in the UK, I think we've been very successful at decarbonising our national grid. This is a picture of the the carbon intensity, and you can see how it's really reduced quite rapidly in the last sort of 10 years as a result of investment in renewable energy and growth in our nuclear sector. And that national context is changing how we design new and existing developments, and changing our approach to providing energy within our city scales. This is a project we're working on in Sunderland. We're putting in a local energy network. It's a microgrid. We've got some funding from the government to support its implementation. It's about to go out for tender and due to be start on site later this year. And this is just a schematic which we used for the funding applications, modelling work we've been doing to sort of optimise the system demand. But we were also really interested about the relationship with people, because zero carbon technologies can only work if people and communities are engaged, and we make it easy for people to use those technologies and mitigate this thing called the performance gap. And then on circularity, we know that the construction sector is both the biggest consumer of resources, but also the biggest contributor of waste. And this is a piece of work that we've done for the West Midlands Combined Authority. It's a series of local authorities in the middle of the UK, and we mapped all the resource flows in the region to define all of those associated with construction, demolition, and our sector. And on the back of this, we identified the business case and are developing the business case for a circular economy hub, or a zero waste construction hub, that is going to be developed, because we've got massive amount of housing to be delivered. HS2, our new high-speed rail, goes through, so there's a lot of demand for such a thing. I wanted to show you a picture of what it might look like, but it's still in development. But I was at the weekend at the Venice Biennale, and the German pavilion had collected all of the materials that have come out of the previous Biennale, Architecture Biennale that was held 2 years ago. They've catalogued them, and you can see each one of these has got a barcode, a QR code, so you can identify which pavilion it came from, what the material is, what its properties are. And this effectively is what we're trying to achieve with our Circular Economy Construction Hub, that you'll be able to use materials. Many of these materials actually haven't even been used. You can see they're just over-ordered. So creating an environment where reuse becomes the norm. Of course, it's much easier to reuse things that when they're already in place. And one of the other areas of work around the circular economy that we're looking at is how you deal with existing fabric in the environment, because that most of our built assets will exist that will exist in 2050 are already built today. So this is an example where we've repurposed an old 1950s office building and brought it up to modern day standards. Otherwise, this would become a stranded asset. So that was a very fast pace, because I realised we're out of time, overview of what we do as a practice and how we're thinking about urban design and sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you, Judith. That was tremendous. We have time for a very brief Q&A. Before we go there, I just want to make 2 points. One is that this is, as I said earlier, so diverse a subject that it's very clear to me that apart from Tim, who couldn't join us this evening, having a separate session, we could have separate sessions with Samuel, with Judith, and with many other experts on this. We have the material for a whole series, and I think I'm actually going to commit now as Secretary General to implementing such a series. That doesn't mean that my second point was going to be that there isn't any overlap, because even in such two such completely different presentations as we've just heard, there were serious overlaps. I mean, for example, the history of Hong Kong housing, which Samuel was explaining so eloquently, resonates extremely much with what Judith was saying about the problems of the conservative, or rather the not very thinking way of looking about housing. Anyway, I'm not a speaker today, I'm just a moderator. So let's go quickly to a couple of Q&As. Firstly, a question maybe first to Samuel. You have a historical perspective. Now, all the issues we've been talking about are normally regarded as quite recent phenomenon, or at least they've only become hot topics in the media relatively recently, and now everybody talks about them. So what are the lessons that we can learn, if any, from older urban models going back to the past, whether it is in the Commonwealth or Hong Kong or UK or wherever?
Thank you so much for this question. One of the areas actually I think is really between the whether a city actually is grew organically or grew through planning. I think this is a very interesting, actually not only actually interested by archaeologists, but also by modern by historians as well as by modern planners. I think this is it really depends on I think going back to the my talk actually, which is that it was only took a process actually for the colonial government actually to move to a more comprehensive and long-term planning. In the beginning, actually, they only began to respond actually to some of the issues, but they didn't, have almost like the trial and error. So in terms of, although they already received a warning actually from experts from Britain, the engineer actually professor from UCL, Osbert actually Chadwick, and but they didn't quite understand that the consequences of not taking that advice. But that itself, actually, the NERM immediately after actually the outbreak in 1894, actually bubonic actually plague, that they need to began to not just to segregate actually but also actually to actually get engaged actually with the Chinese community in terms of planning, even to engage actually to utilize that Chinese traditional kind of urban planning, urban governance actually methodology, so that Chinese communities govern themselves. I think there was this, they really began. They also, in terms of planning, they also began to pay attention actually to the living standards and living conditions of the Chinese, especially in the new territories where they disperse actually the population.
Sure. So the past has lessons for the future in that sense, yes?
Yes, I think it's oftentimes actually and also this is something, but it's not just that modern time we have a planning or the planning actually history went all the way actually to very early actually. So it's really wrong actually misconception for Peter Hall actually, which is a great figure actually in modern planning history, to say that actually there was no planning in pre-industrialization era in terms of urban planning. That certainly is not true. I think there were very sophisticated urban, not only urban, but regional planning combined together already in the Neo-Assyrian Empire where I work on.
Can I just pause you at that point, because I'd just like to move on to Judith for a moment and taking that forward. So, you both work in all sorts of different urban environments, and our concern here, Martina's, mine is with the Commonwealth, but Commonwealth or otherwise. I mean, your job, Judith, is sort of to make things happen. You have, you're an engineer. You have to deal with these planning and ecological constraints, but you have to make it work with engineering solutions which happen. Now, if Tim were here, he'd be talking about technology, but from an engineering perspective, how does that look?
So I think we know a lot of the solutions that need to be delivered and how they can be delivered to benefit to meet those ecological challenges in particular. And as I've said, the funding rate has aligned. I think what differs from place to place is the political and social context in which you're operating in. So when we're working in different environments, the technology is one thing, but what you're placing into it is the thing that you really need to understand.
Sure.
So if you want to deliver good infrastructure, understanding your stakeholders, understanding how this relates to their ambitions, be it political or if they're technical stakeholders, how it supports what they're trying to achieve, understanding the legislative environment as well, that quite often we find that some of the local policies can actually get in the way because they were designed to mitigate against something, and this is not predicting what we're putting forward now. So I think the solutions are known, but changing the environment in which you're operating in or understanding the environment that you're placing that technology is super important.
I think that's very well put, and that leads me to my final question, which I'd like to give to both of you to give a very brief response. So you're both very experienced in the UK, in Hong Kong, in the Commonwealth, elsewhere. Here, of course, we're a Chinese city. How would you say the lessons are that we here could learn from the experiences that you've been describing, or perhaps even, given both of your experiences, different experiences in China, that we could actually teach to others, whether in the Commonwealth or elsewhere? So what's the learning process, mutual learning process between us and the rest of the world in that respect? So very brief answer. Let me go to Judith first and then give Samuel the final word.
I think we need to learn how to talk to each other. I think our sector has become increasingly siloed, and we've all developed different language to talk about what we're doing. And so I think the reason I'm probably more successful in what I've achieved is I've learned to talk in a language that that crosses discipline and crosses stakeholders, and in doing so you can build a consensus about what you're going to trying to achieve, which most people agree on, and then agree on how that's going to be delivered. But it's being able to talk the same language.
That's a very good, concise answer. Samuel, just a couple of sentences. What would your final take be on that?
Yeah, thank you. In terms of urban development, I would say that actually Hong Kong's high density with the verticality actually is something many cities could learn. People oftentimes thinking about how, China has a very large population, therefore it should be very dense, but it's not in terms of density, population density, it's not. So there's a lot to learn actually from Hong Kong's density, high density with the verticality, which was really learning, actually picking up from French urban planner, French and Swiss Le Corbusier, as was even as early as Roman actually insulate actually in terms of verticality. I think even go, as I said, actually even going back earlier.
Well, we'll certainly have to I'll have to bring you back anyway. I'm not sure in this forum for a discussion of urban insulae in Rome, on which I have quite strong views. Look, thank you both very, very much. In the interest of time, I'm afraid I do have to bring this fascinating webinar to a conclusion. I thank both of my distinguished guests. I think that the presentations and the replies today just reinforce what I've believed already, which is that urban development and therefore design are arguably the most critical issues affecting the whole future of global society, which sounds a bit pretentious, but I don't think so, because everything else fits into it. The development is going to happen whatever we do, but of course it's up to us to decide what the design is. I have one final word to share, which is that Tim has agreed to give a separate fireside chat, and we're, as I said earlier, I think I can commit now to working with you all and other friends and experts in this area. We need to explore all these aspects more fully in a full series with the CCCHK. I also like to thank all our guests and members for signing up to this event, despite the timing and the different time zones. Please do keep an eye on our website for future functions. Do let us know if there are other suitable topics which you believe that we should address, other than this enormous one that we've started to talk about today. With those remarks, thank you all again, and I'd like now to hand back the virtual floor to Martina for a few concluding remarks. Thank you.
Don't worry, I will not be keeping anyone. I just want to express my gratitude to our speakers once again. You guys were spectacular and you gave us a lot to think about. And of course, thank you so much to our audience for tuning in as well. We look forward to seeing you all soon. And thanks once again. Bye, guys. Thank you so much.